Hello everyone. This is a shorter version of the video we made the other day during a question and answer session on the Reaching Families Facebook page to cover the main points and sum up what we talked about then. You may have heard the expression that all behaviour is communication. Everything we say and everything we do is behaviour, but we tend to think about, when we talk about behaviour in our children, we're usually talking about bad behaviour or behaviour we don't want, don't we? And we spend a lot of time describing it and worrying about it, but we spend less time perhaps teaching our children strategies and demonstrating what we do want them to do. So that's going to be a recurring theme over what I'm saying now. At the moment, the very unusual situation we're living through is throwing the behaviour of our children into very sharp focus, because we're with them so much more than we might be normally when they're at school or nursery or wherever else they go during part of the day. And they may be expressing their anxieties about what's going on in unusual ways, and ways that are very difficult and challenging for the rest of the family to cope with. Understanding that doesn't make it any necessarily easier to deal with, does it? But being able to understand that and thinking of ways to intervene and change is the first step on being able to change those behaviours. The type of behaviours that we tend to see as a challenge fall into the following broad categories: the reactions to the sensory environment, the inability to effectively emotionally regulate, and having very low tolerance towards frustration. So if something starts to go wrong, reacting in a kind of cross or angry way rather than being able to problem solve and sort out a situation for themselves. Okay. We also often refer to attention-seeking behaviour, which I tend to prefer to call attention-needing behaviour. There are some children that will behave in increasingly dramatic ways in order to get your attention, and having negative attention for these children is better than having no children at all. And that can be very difficult, because if you respond to them even negatively, getting cross, sending them to their rooms, or punishing them, taking their toys away, whatever, it's kind of perpetuating that cycle, because they have got the attention they were craving, and just not in a very good way. And trying to help them get attention for more positive things is a way of breaking into those kind of negative cycles. Otherwise it becomes some sort of battle of wills or battle for control, which is very difficult for both sides to deal with. So in our current circumstances, what I'd be encouraging you to look at is having some kind of routine in your day. Not a rigid routine that's trying to replicate school and do everything at exactly the same time every day, but having some sort of structure, perhaps a visual timetable to help you. I'll put some examples on the Facebook page later on about that. So the structure and routine, acceptable ways to burn off energy. If your children aren't going out as much as they usually do, and they're outdoorsy kind of kids that like that, it's going to be very difficult for them being cooped up indoors all day. So finding ways to burn off energy indoors is very important. Also, activities and stimulation at the right level of them, things to do, creative activities, learning activities, games. You might be digging out old games you haven't played for years. Jigsaw puzzles, apparently the manufacturers of jigsaw puzzles are working overtime. And also having ways of relaxing and unwinding for all of the family. That's really important as well. And some children just don't know how to do that. So this might be the time to develop an interest in yoga, or have you heard of mindfulness? That's worth exploring. Or just playing simple games like sleeping lions or musical statues, or anything that encourages moments of stillness and quiet, listening to a story tape, listening to calming music that you wouldn't normally listen to. But that's a really, really important thing to encourage. Also, looking out for danger zones. Are there particular times, particular triggers where things are very, very difficult? Could be meal times, bedtimes, changes between activities and things like that. Look for patterns and think of a plan to try to do things a little bit differently to help everyone get through that particularly difficult time. So distractions for distracting and diverting are very important, because you may have heard of that, the idea of the anger mountain. If you've been on any behaviour training, that idea that there's a pattern where there's a trigger, things get gradually more and more tense, you see the signs where things are going a bit haywire, and then they go up and up and up the mountain, and then suddenly there's an explosion. Well, we're trying to avoid getting to the top of that mountain, and actually intervening a little bit earlier on, coming in with what we call de-escalating strategies earlier on, is a way of avoiding getting to that kind of pinnacle and big explosion of often anger, if we possibly can. So, and if you do get to that situation where it's an all-out, explosion of anger or temper, at that moment, it's not the right time to intervene and ask why or ask questions. Just calming, soothing, getting over that point is the most important thing at that point. But then afterwards, talking about how could that have been different? How could we have handled that better? What could you do instead? Those kind of questions, if your child is able to understand those kind of questions. Obviously, pitch them to their age and ability as appropriate. So using up this physical energy is going to be quite a challenge for some of you. There's lots of ideas, though, almost too many ideas about what to do coming online at you. It seems like half the country is doing Joe Wick's workout in the morning, indoor gym type activities, workouts, running up and down the stairs, setting little competitions. How many times, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, how many times can you run up and down the garden in 5 minutes? Adding a little challenge, a little bit more every day, that sort of thing. Dancing, have you got an old Wii you're not using so much lately with those dancing programs on? Even an old disco mat, I don't know if they even work anymore. I remember you having those years ago. Or having a disco time, just putting on some music, having a set half an hour where the kids all jump around and use a bit of energy, depending on what age they are. You might not be able to get teenagers to do that, who knows. But short, sharp bursts in between other activities. It's difficult if your children have got very short attention spans. Very young children will very rarely do anything much for more than 10 minutes. So having a range of activities, but it doesn't need to be constant novelty. You can do them in a kind of, if you're doing modelling clay one day, you might not do it for very long, but then you put it away and get it out again another day. Or making flowers out of egg boxes, I saw the other day. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of expensive materials to do things. Painting stones is a popular idea as well, isn't it, at the moment? Making posters, putting rainbows in the window, all of those things are quite nice things for children to do and feel some sort of sense of community and being in the same situation as other people. Emotional regulation or mood swings is another problem that you might be finding even more trying than usual. And so one of the ways of dealing with this is to help your child what we call co-regulate. So you're helping them to be able to label and describe their feelings. I mean, some of you will do that anyway. And you're saying things like, oh, I noticed that that's making you a bit cross, or you seem to be feeling a bit sad, and encouraging them to talk, maybe using stories that remove the situation. You're not asking them to analyse their feelings, but you might read a story about an animal or a character in a book having a similar situation, and they might be more able to talk about that. But recognising their feelings and naming what's happening is really important. The other thing that came up in the question and answer session was children missing their family and friends, but when they had the opportunity to speak to them online or in Zoom, they turned away and didn't really know how to handle it. Well, what I would suggest for that is maybe a little bit of preparation in advance, maybe drawing a picture, saying, oh, you can show grandma that later, or why don't you, draw a picture for your friend and you can show them, but not expecting too much too soon. Someone told me a story of two young boys with autism who were contacting each other and just sitting watching each other eat their tea. They weren't saying anything, but they were getting kind of comfort from that sort of thing. So building a Lego model or showing their friends something they've done that day might be a nice thing to do. And the idea of when's it all going to end, that was another thing that was concerning people, and we don't know the answer. We've been told we have another 3 weeks on what they're calling lockdown at the moment. We don't know when they'll go back to school yet. So, but rather than just saying I don't know and giving that sort of sense of anxiety and things being out of control, maybe it wouldn't be too harmful to say, well, perhaps in June, and so you're giving the idea that there will be an end, but you don't quite know what yet. But you'd have to decide what's appropriate for your child. So if your child is behaving in ways you're finding really difficult to handle, then have a look at the sensory environment. Are there things you can control? It might be that they're spending more time with their siblings, and the general noise and closed-inness is really difficult for them. That trying to create the idea of personal space and having some time, if they need quiet time on their own, as far as you possibly can in your immediate environment, might be quite important. And using music, don't underestimate how powerful music can be to calm situations. Use the activities just in quite short bursts. Don't expect sort of hours. It might be that you're lucky enough to have children that will play with Lego or something for a long time at a time. Build in things they like, interspersed with a little bit of the schoolwork that you're probably being sent or will be next week, and ask a school for advice. It's perfectly reasonable to do that. That's what they're there for. Build in some structure, build in some routine, but be flexible and don't expect too much. It's a difficult time for all of you, and try to focus on being in the moment and finding something each day to be happy about. One thing that brought you joy.